In the heart of a once happy home, a storm of emotions swirled as the remnants of love lay shattered on the floor. Rob stood at the center of it all, grappling with the pain of betrayal and the weight of memories that no longer held meaning. The walls that had echoed with laughter and promises now bore witness to the unraveling of a marriage. This is a story of love's transformation into heartache, where a final confrontation becomes a bitter reflection of what once was, leaving behind only the ashes of a shared life. As Rob confronts Helen, the woman he once cherished, the atmosphere crackles with tension and unresolved emotions, setting the stage for a powerful reckoning. The house was eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of water running from the upstairs bathroom. As I ascended the stairs and stepped into my bedroom, I was met with a shocking sight. The bed was a chaotic mess. Pillows, sheets, and blankets lay strewn about, and in the center was a large, unmistakable wet spot. It was clear that someone had been there, sweating profusely, my worst fears confirmed. From the bathroom, I could hear Helen's cheerful singing mingling with the sound of the shower. My heart sank as anger and disbelief surged within me. How could my wife, the woman I'd been married to for 24 years, be having an affair with our neighbor, Mark Malik, right under my nose? I reminisced about our first meeting. It was years ago at my cousin's wedding, where I was still in the police academy and she was helping with the catering. Helen had captured my heart immediately, petite, charmingly attractive, not a conventional beauty but with an incredible physique that left an impression on me. After a year of dating, we tied the knot, and for the most part, our marriage seemed perfect. I was a dedicated officer, and Helen thrived in her catering career, taking on freelance gigs that allowed her to balance work and motherhood. We raised two wonderful daughters, Linda and Veronica. Linda had just graduated from college and landed a job in Chicago, while Veronica was thriving in her junior year at Kenyon College. Helen had always been an exceptional mother, and we shared a bond that felt unbreakable. Our values aligned, our family priorities matched, and we still found joy in each other's company after all these years. Yet, there was one aspect of our life that had always troubled me, our sex life. Helen had always been attractive and captivating, and I vividly recalled the thrill I felt the first time I saw her body during our courtship. However, as time passed, I found that her interest in sexual intimacy dwindled significantly. What once was a lively romance turned into a frustrating routine of intimacy occurring every 10 days or so, in stark contrast to the 3 to 4 times a week we enjoyed at the beginning of our marriage. I voiced my dissatisfaction repeatedly over the years, and we even sought help from a family therapist when our daughters were younger. After years of disappointment, I realized that Helen's lack of desire wasn't a reflection of her feelings for me, rather, she simply had a low interest in sex. The counselor helped me process my anger and assisted Helen in recognizing her need for improvement. As a result, our intimacy increased slightly to perhaps once a week, occasionally twice when I could persuade her. I held on to hope that as our daughters moved out for college, we would reclaim some of the freedom we had lost and reignite our physical connection. But those dreams never came to fruition. Our intimacy devolved into fleeting encounters, leaving me yearning for affection. More often than not, when I tried to initiate intimacy, Helen would deflect my advances, saying things like, "Not today, honey. Can we just make it quick?" I was confused. Didn't women typically desire more foreplay? The disappointment I felt from not being able to truly enjoy my wife for months was disheartening. It might be easy to ask myself why I stayed with someone who didn't meet my needs, but the reality was that Helen and I shared a deep love and mutual respect. Despite her lack of sexual enthusiasm, she demonstrated her affection for me in countless ways, and we envisioned a future growing old together. So, when I stumbled down the stairs and out the front door, my feelings were a tumultuous mix of shock and fury. I had always trusted Helen completely, believing that her lack of interest in intimacy meant she would never betray me. What on earth was happening? In less than 3 minutes, I arrived at Mark Malik's house, my heart racing with anger. I rang the doorbell, and when he opened the door a crack, his uncertainty was palpable. "Hi, Rob. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Without a moment's hesitation, I pushed the door wide open, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground. I closed the door behind me and lunged forward, driving my knee into his gut, doubling him over in pain. The sight of his pale, terrified face pleased me. He was at a loss for words. Grabbing him by the collar with my left hand, I struck him repeatedly, feeling an overwhelming need to assert my rage. Finally, I hurled Mark onto the living room couch, watching as he gasped for air, struggling to regain his composure. Leaning in closer, I whispered, "Listen carefully, you worthless piece of trash. I know exactly where you were and what you were doing this morning. I'm on edge, and I've got a gun and a shovel." His silence confirmed everything I needed to know. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that loomed in the air. Mark's eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear and desperation. "You're going to tell me everything I want to know," I said firmly, my grip tightening just enough around his neck to command his attention. "You'll answer all my questions, clean yourself up, and then you will never, under any circumstances, speak to Helen again. Do you understand?" The frantic nodding that followed, paired with his terrified whisper of "Yes, Rob, I understand," made it clear that he grasped the gravity of the situation. After releasing him, I gestured for him to begin. I made it clear that honesty was the only option. There was no room for hiding or minimizing what had transpired. With a heavy heart, he began to confess. Mark revealed that he and Helen had been entangled in a sexual relationship for over 2 months. To my shock, he claimed that Helen had initiated everything during a neighborhood gathering on the 4th of July, where she openly flirted with him in private moments. A few days later, Mark recounted, Helen had called him early one morning, asking for help moving a filing cabinet. When he arrived, she greeted him at the door wearing only a bathrobe. Grateful for his assistance, she pulled him in for a passionate kiss, and before he knew it, they were in our bedroom. My mind raced as I absorbed the weight of his words. The woman I thought I had known for 24 years had been eagerly engaging in a clandestine affair with Mark. Mark went on to explain how Helen had been enthusiastic about their meetings, looking forward to every encounter. Despite his lingering doubts, he asked her repeatedly, "Are you sure this is okay? What about Rob?" He insisted that she had promised him that it would remain a secret. Since their first rendezvous, they had been meeting several times a week, alternating between my home and his. Then came the moment that sent chills down my spine. "This morning," he said, "when I went to her house, she met me at the door, and we went upstairs. I could hardly believe my ears. The person I had loved and trusted was living a double life, and I was left reeling from the realization. Curiosity mixed with rage propelled me to ask one final question. You can attend to your mess after this. Was I really the first man she betrayed in this way?" Mark seemed to crumble at my inquiry. "She hinted that there were a few before you," he replied, "but only mentioned one, Joe something, an older firefighter. She said he ended things because his wife was suspicious." The mention of Joe hit me like a punch to the gut. He was a close family friend, someone we had known since our daughters were little. I realized then how fortunate I was to have spent the afternoon gathering my thoughts rather than confronting Helen immediately, which could have ended explosively. As I returned home for dinner, I had managed to mask my fury behind a facade of normalcy. Helen, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, acted cheerful and affectionate as we sat down for a seemingly ordinary meal. We chatted about our children, her catering events, and the monotony of my day job, conversations that felt surreal, given what I now knew. Later that evening, as she settled into bed, watching a rerun of CSI, I joined her, heart racing with a mix of emotions. The bedroom looked pristine, the sheets fresh, an ironic contrast to the chaos unfolding in my mind. I leaned over to kiss her cheek, slipping my hand under her nightgown to caress her thigh. She glanced at me warily, her voice soft but firm. "Not tonight, darling. I'm feeling a bit exhausted. Let's just relax and watch some TV." Normally, I would have respected her wishes, perhaps feeling a hint of disappointment. But not tonight. I pressed on, gently moving my hand upward, insisting, "No, I really need you tonight, honey. Trust me, you'll enjoy it." The irritation in her voice was palpable as she replied, "Rob, I really want to, but I'm exhausted." "It's only 9:30, you can't be that tired." Her unwavering gaze met mine, and in a moment of reckless defiance, I softly suggested, "What if you imagine I'm Mark?" The surprise that flashed across her face was undeniable. It was a look I had never seen in our years together, an expression that revealed a chasm between us. Despite the shock, she ultimately surrendered to intimacy without uttering another word, a stark contrast to the passion we had shared before. Afterward, I slipped out of bed without a glance back, heading for the shower, my mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. When I emerged, hair damp from the shower, I found Helen sitting up in bed, her demeanor changed. She had made the bed, put on her nightgown, and combed her hair. Tears were visible on her cheeks, a telltale sign that she had been crying. "Rob, she began, but I cut her off. "Let me speak first, Helen." I paused, locking eyes with her. "I went to Mark's house today, just before lunch, and I saw him leaving. I came upstairs and heard you in the shower, and I noticed the state of our bedroom. So spare me the excuses or any attempts to deceive me, okay?" Her head drooped, a blush creeping across her cheeks, and she nodded silently. "I'm not sure if our marriage can weather this storm," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. Her eyes widened in horror, but I continued, "If there's any chance of salvaging this, it starts with you being completely honest with me. Do you understand, Helen?" Tears welled up in her eyes again as she sobbed, "I'm so sorry, Rob. I can't believe I've done something so terrible." Overcome with emotion, she struggled to find her words. "All I ask is for you to give me one more chance. I'll tell you everything, but please don't hate me." "Fine, then. Tell me the whole truth about you and Mark, what happened, when, where, how long, and why," I demanded. She sobbed for a while longer before wiping her tears. "I never really noticed him until the 4th of July picnic," she began, her voice shaking. "Suddenly, he was always around, bringing drinks and hot dogs, being overly friendly. A few times when you weren't around, he would flirt with me, stare at me, even touch my back. But that was a few months ago, and I completely forgot about it until last week when he called and asked if he could come over to help with a recipe he was preparing for his new girlfriend. So, he came over, and we worked on it together. I explained something to him, and he was very grateful. We had a cup of coffee, and then everything changed." As she spoke, tears streamed down her face again, and I felt a mix of heartbreak and disbelief. "I don't know why this happened," she continued. "I felt strange, and before I knew it, he carried me upstairs to the bedroom. You know." She hesitated, tears pouring down her cheeks once more. "I just don't understand why I didn't stop him when I said no. He's a real monster." Rob felt a knot tightening in his stomach as he listened to Helen. She had just confessed to an unsettling secret that turned their world upside down. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Rob," she said, her voice trembling. "I was at the coffee shop, and he put something in my drink." Helen fumbled with her digital camera, her fingers shaking as she pulled up a picture of the two of them, an intimate snapshot she never wanted to take. "He threatened me, Rob. If I didn't keep seeing him, he said he'd share these photos with you and everyone at the station." Rob's heart raced with confusion. It felt as if the ground beneath him was crumbling. He remained silent, his mind racing as he fought the urge to dismiss her story as a web of lies. Deep down, he was skeptical, yet he decided to let her speak. Just last week, he had received a phone call from Mark, who insisted he would be back in town today at 10:30 a.m. Rob's stomach churned at the thought of the incriminating evidence that could unravel his life. "Helen," he exhaled heavily, trying to stay calm. "Why didn't you tell me right after it happened? Do you even realize how serious this is? We could have tested your blood and reported him for assault. She looked down, her eyes cast toward the floor. I know. I see that now. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was terrified of how you'd react, both toward me and him. I was so scared, Rob, she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. Her words sounded almost rehearsed, a narrative crafted to elicit sympathy. But could it be true? The notion that Mark Malik would be reckless enough to assault a police officer's spouse seemed far-fetched. Yet, as Rob contemplated her tale, it began to make sense, despite contradicting everything he thought he knew about his wife. Then there was the most damning evidence of all, the sound of Helen cheerfully singing in the shower just minutes after her alleged encounter with Malik. Rob stared out the window, frustration bubbling within him. You've acted foolishly, Helen. After 25 years together, I expected more trust from you. Helen glanced at him sheepishly, repeating, I'm so sorry, Rob. I just need some time to think about how to handle this. Maybe a few days? During that time, don't talk to Mark or anyone else about this, he said firmly. She nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. Please, Rob, don't do anything reckless. Rob leaned forward, scrutinizing her face. Be honest with me now, has this been the only time you've cheated in our marriage? Helen hesitated, trying to meet his gaze, but her eyes darted away, a telltale sign. Rob knew what that meant. No one else, darling. No one but you. Until Mark, she stammered, her voice trailing off. The blatant lie reignited Rob's anger. He sprang from the bed, pacing the room as frustration bubbled over. If it's not clear already, I'm extremely displeased with you. Tonight, you'll be sleeping in the guest room. Pack your things and leave. Rob, she started, but he interrupted with increasing intensity, I'm done discussing this tonight. Now get out of here. With a gasp, she hurriedly grabbed her bathrobe and exited the bedroom. Rob flopped onto the bed, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He turned on the television, trying to focus on the football game, but his mind raced. To his surprise, he slept better than he had in ages, even without Helen by his side. Maybe it was the release of pent-up tension. The next morning, the aroma of fresh coffee greeted him as he descended the stairs. To his surprise, Helen had gone all out for breakfast, pancakes, sausages, scrambled eggs, and even freshly squeezed orange juice. She stood at the counter, pouring coffee, her expression a mix of exhaustion and forced cheerfulness. Good morning, sweetie, she said timidly, handing him a cup. Morning, Helen, he replied neutrally, observing the lavish spread she had prepared. They sat down together, engaging in light conversation, and he noted how her demeanor gradually shifted as they ate. But as he finished his meal, he knew he had to uncover the truth. I need some time alone, he announced suddenly, standing up. He wasted no time, heading to his basement workshop before driving to Joe Older's house. Upon arriving, he spotted Joe walking toward his front door, mail in hand. Hey, Joe. Wanna come check out the new car I'm thinking of buying? Rob called out, feigning casualness as they headed toward Forbes Avenue, where the dealerships were located. He turned onto a quiet side street, pulling into a secluded parking lot behind the football field. Joe, looking puzzled, turned to him. Rob, why are we here? What's going on? In a flash, Rob pointed his service revolver 6 inches from Joe's face. You despicable jerk. We've been friends for over 15 years, but that didn't stop you from betraying me with Helen, did it? Joe's face drained of color, and he recoiled instinctively. Rob, who are you? He stammered. Cut the crap, Rob snapped. I talked to Helen, and she spilled everything. I'm so close to pulling this trigger that you'll vanish without a trace. Fear washed over Joe, who realized he had no chance of denying the truth. Rob, I swear, it wasn't my fault. She kept coming on to me. I told her we were just friends and that it wasn't right, but she wouldn't back off. Rob lowered the gun slightly, watching as Joe took a deep breath, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Tell me everything, slowly and carefully. Don't leave out a single detail. If your story doesn't match Helen's, I'll make your infidelity look like an accident." Joe, desperate to avoid the consequences, complied eagerly. His version of events mirrored Helen's. She had been the aggressive one, spending too much time with him. About a year ago, she started making comments, flirting more than usual. Rob listened intently, each word only fueling the fire within him. It was a tense moment, one that had been building for far too long. Rob took a deep breath and decided it was time to confront the truth. "Look, I know this is hard to hear, but I need to tell you everything," he said carefully, glancing at his friend Joe, who was seated beside him in the car. "Just put the gun down, okay?" Joe nodded, his eyes wide, signaling he was ready to listen. "This isn't easy for me either, but you need to know what I found out. Helen. She's been unfaithful to you." The look on Joe's face was one of disbelief and confusion. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. Rob pressed on. "Helen has been seeing someone else. In fact, she's been seeing him for about 8 months now. We met a couple of times a week, nothing serious at first, but it quickly escalated." He saw Joe's expression harden, fear mixing with anger. "I was always terrified that you would find out, but Stephanie started to suspect something was off. She could feel it in the air, like something sinister lurking just beneath the surface." Joe's eyes darted to the window, clearly struggling to process the information. "So, when did this all end?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It ended last June," Rob replied. "I told her we had to stop. She wasn't thrilled about it, but she was more worried about Stephanie finding out. She even joked that she'd have to find someone else to fill my shoes." A sense of betrayal washed over Joe's face as Rob continued. "Have you ever asked her why she cheated?" "Yeah, I did," Joe murmured, his voice low. "I wanted to know why she felt the need to go outside our relationship. But every time, she just said she loved me and that I was a great guy. She claimed she needed something more." Rob leaned back, studying Joe. "Do you think you were her first? Did she ever mention anyone else?" Joe sighed heavily, looking away. "She mentioned a couple of other guys, but I didn't know any of them. She said one was someone she met at a party. It's sickening to think about." With a growing sense of indignation, Rob retorted, "You know what? You're a despicable guy. No matter how much she flirted with you, there was a right way to handle this, and you chose the worst possible path." Joe hung his head, the shame palpable. Rob could see the relief wash over him that he was still in one piece, that Rob wasn't going to hurt him. "Our friendship is done. Get out of my car," Rob commanded. "But it's at least 10 miles to my place." Joe protested, but Rob's expression brooked no argument. Joe exited the car slowly, walking a few paces away in stunned silence. Rob turned the car around, his heart heavy as he headed back to town. He pulled up to Joe and Stephanie's house and found Stephanie there, a concerned look on her face. "Hey Rob, weren't you with Joe?" she asked, glancing at the empty passenger seat. "Something came up. Can we talk for a minute?" he replied, guiding her into the kitchen where they both settled with steaming cups of coffee. "Stephanie, I don't know how to say this easily, but Joe and Helen, they had an affair." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Rob, I can't believe that. I suspected something might be going on, but not with Helen." Reaching into his pocket, Rob pulled out a mini recorder he had discreetly activated before leaving his house. He rewound it and hit play, the conversation between him and Joe filling the room. Rob listened intently as the recording played, feeling the familiar sting of betrayal wash over him again. As the tape ended, silence enveloped them. Stephanie's face was a mask of shock and anger. "This can't be right. We've been friends for so long. I never thought Joe would do something like this." Rob leaned in closer, determined to make her understand. "I know it's hard to hear, but Joe isn't the man you think he is. You deserve to know the truth." Stephanie's expression shifted, and she looked at him with newfound suspicion. "Are you trying to make a move on me? Is this some sort of revenge?" "Absolutely not," Rob exclaimed. "You know me better than that. I came here because I care about you, and I want you to know what kind of person your husband really is. I'm here to support you, nothing more." Tears began to well in Stephanie's eyes. "I'm so sorry, Rob. This is just too much for me to process right now. It's hard to trust anyone after all this." Rob reached out, comforting her as she began to weep. "Listen, both of us have been wronged here. You're a wonderful person, and I'm on your side. Helen will be out of my life soon, and if you need help dealing with Joe, I'll be here for you." They shared a moment of connection in that kitchen, both of them feeling the weight of their shattered relationships. Rob felt the tears flowing down his cheeks, a cathartic release that he had been holding back. As he left Stephanie's house, he contemplated the magnitude of Helen's betrayal. She had not only cheated but had engaged in multiple affairs, all while pushing him away emotionally. The thought of her being intimate with other men while refusing to connect with him was unbearable. He knew he needed to confide in his daughter Linda, so he called her. When she answered, her voice was filled with joy, but he could sense something was off. "Dad, what's going on? You sound different. I need to talk to you about something important. Can we meet?" "Of course. I'm excited to see you." Over a meal at a nearby diner, Linda filled him in on her new job and her complicated relationship with Chad. But Rob could no longer hold back. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you why I'm really here. Things aren't great with me and your mother. She's been unfaithful, and it shattered our marriage." Linda's expression turned serious. "What happened, Dad? You can't just drop a bomb like that. I know it's a lot, but I want you to hear it from me first. I can't keep pretending everything is fine." As he recounted the events of the past few days, he saw Linda's concern deepen. "I'm glad you told me, but I wish it were different. It's just so hard to believe. I know, and I'm so sorry you have to go through this. But I promise you, I'll handle it. I'm here for you." Linda reached across the table, squeezing his hand tightly, both of them finding strength in one another. "Rob, I need to tell you something important before anyone else does," Helen said, her voice trembling as she sat across from me. "Your mother and I are separating." The words hung heavy in the air, and my heart sank as the gravity of her statement hit me. "I've discovered that she's been unfaithful to me with multiple men for quite some time." The following hours felt like an eternity as I watched Linda struggle to grasp the truth. It was heartbreaking to see her innocence shattered. I had to tread carefully, balancing the need to convey the painful reality while shielding her from the most brutal details of her mother's betrayal. Later that day, as we sat in Linda's living room, the reality began to sink in. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and I could feel her pain. She was mourning not just the betrayal of her mother but the entire concept of our family as it had once been. That night, I opted to sleep on Linda's couch, hoping to comfort her in some small way. Before I left the next morning, I made a plea. "Please don't confront your mom just yet. Wait until she reaches out to you. I need to speak with Veronica today and start the divorce process. Your relationship with her is yours to decide. Just remember, she loves you dearly, and whatever she did to me, not to you." I arrived at Kenyon around 9 p.m. that Sunday, feeling drained from the emotional turmoil. My meeting with Veronica was painful, filled with tears, and inundated with questions that felt unanswerable. By early Monday morning, I was on my way home. I hadn't turned on my mobile phone since I left the city, and when I finally did, I found 11 messages from Helen. They ranged from tearful apologies to increasingly desperate pleas for my understanding. I deleted them all, knowing I had to focus on closing the last chapter of my marriage. The devastation I felt was profound. The union I had poured my heart into, one I envisioned lasting a lifetime, was now in ruins. All of this heartbreak was a result of my wife's reckless choices. I knew I needed legal advice, so I reached out to a lawyer I knew through the PBA for a divorce recommendation. Upon arriving in the city, I immediately visited the office the lawyer suggested. After an hour of discussion and a review of Joe's record, we began the process. The girls were away, so custody and alimony weren't immediate concerns. My primary focus was on the house. If Helen contested it, I was prepared to publicly shame her. Beyond that, I wasn't particularly interested in the other assets. At around 4 p.m., as I passed by our house, I was relieved to see that Helen's car wasn't there. I parked in the garage and arranged for a locksmith to come by in 24 hours. When Helen returned at 6 p.m., I was ready. I could sense her disappointment and annoyance as she tried to open the front door with her key. I quietly opened it, and her irritation shifted to a mixture of tenderness and nervousness. "Rob. Thank God you're back. Where have you been for 2 days? I was so worried. Why didn't you call?" she exclaimed, her voice a blend of relief and concern. I waved away her questions. "Come inside, Helen. Please, take a seat in the living room." When she reached out for a hug, I stepped back and walked into the living room, her puzzled expression following me. "Rob, dear, what's going on?" Her voice quivered slightly, concern evident in her eyes. I gestured for her to sit on the sofa, my gaze steady on her. I had loved this woman for so many years, and yet, here we were. I let the silence linger, letting the weight of the moment sink in before I finally spoke. "Helen, you know I would never lay a hand on you or hurt you. Once upon a time, I loved you deeply." She exhaled sharply. "Rob, once upon a time? I don't understand." "Shut up," I exploded, cutting her off. "I may not physically harm you, but that doesn't mean I don't want to. So just be quiet and listen to me." Her complexion paled, fear and anxiety swirling in her eyes. I could see her hands trembling in her lap. "We're going to have a calm and respectful discussion," I continued, my voice steady. "Then you'll leave. I'm not concerned about where you'll go, and frankly, I don't care. This marriage is over. Our life together is finished." She gasped, her mouth opening as if to speak, but a sharp glance from me silenced her. "You've been unfaithful to me. With Mark. With Joe. With other men as well. I don't know the full extent, and honestly, I'm not interested in it. For months, maybe years, you've been engaging with other men. You've given them what I've pleaded for and done things with them that you refused to do for your loving husband, despite my repeated requests. If infidelity is a measure of love, you've taken it to an extreme. You did it with someone down the street and even one of our closest friends, but not for the man who dedicated himself exclusively to you for over 25 years. I paused, searching her eyes for any flicker of remorse. "I genuinely don't recognize you anymore, Helen. I thought I knew you, but clearly, I was mistaken. I would have sworn on your faithfulness and loyalty with my life. It's fortunate I didn't, isn't it?" I glanced at her, seeing her sitting there, motionless, tears streaming down her cheeks. She seemed entranced, lost in her thoughts. Was she thinking, "Oh no, he must have found out"? Or perhaps, was it worth it in the end? "Here's the crux of the matter that truly irks me: you love me. I know you love me. We envisioned growing old together, and I believe you were sincere. But guess what? That's your consequence. You don't get to grow old with me anymore. You don't get to share a life with me, waking up beside me every day, cuddling with me at night. You don't even get to live in this house anymore." I gestured toward the 3 suitcases in the corner. "In 5 minutes, you'll be loading those into your car and driving away. And you won't be coming back." A cry escaped her lips, catching me off guard. "No, Rob. Please, baby. You think you can just walk in here and," I interrupted, my voice sharp and unforgiving. "You bet I can, and I will. I'm kicking you out, but first, we need to take care of a few minor details." I advanced toward her, standing tall and imposing in front of her on the couch. The tension in the room thickened as I watched her recoil slightly, fear flickering in her eyes. In a swift motion, I slid off my wedding ring, letting it drop into her lap. Her eyes widened in shock, and I seized her left hand, removing both her wedding and engagement rings. I let the wedding band fall next to my ring but pocketed the engagement ring, a family heirloom that belonged to my grandmother. "This stays with me," I said firmly. "As for your wedding rings, do whatever you want with them, melt them down, toss them away, or stick them in a drawer. They used to symbolize our love and commitment, but we both know what they mean now, don't we?" I turned away, my heart hardening as I grabbed a stunning glass vase from the coffee table. It was mostly transparent but glimmered with vibrant blue and green hues, a beautiful gift we had exchanged on our 5th anniversary, one that had cost a fortune but had once meant the world to us. "Remember this, Helen?" I asked, my voice void of warmth. Without waiting for her response, I hurled the vase to the floor, where it shattered into countless pieces. Her anguished cry pierced the air, but I felt no sympathy. "Not worth keeping anymore," I stated coldly, turning my back on her. Next, I seized 2 photo albums, our wedding album and the family album filled with memories of happier times. They were a testament to what we once had, but they felt meaningless now. I bent down, dousing them with lighter fluid before striking a match and watching as flames engulfed them. Helen lunged toward the fire, desperation in her eyes as she cried out, "No." I quickly wrapped my arm around her waist and guided her back to the couch, where she collapsed in tears, utterly broken. Together, we watched the flames consume our memories while I felt the reassuring weight of the pictures of our daughters in my pocket. Those memories were mine to keep, precious and invaluable. Within moments, both albums were reduced to ashes. Helen continued to sob, her face turned away from me, consumed by grief. "All right, Helen, that's enough," I interjected, clapping my hands briskly. "The spectacle is over, and it's time for you to leave." Despite my words, she didn't move. I took her arm firmly, urging her to her feet and guiding her toward the front door. "Wait, Rob, please," she pleaded, struggling against my grip. "You can't just kick me out like this." "Actually, I can. And I will," I snapped, my frustration boiling over. I studied her face, the anguish and fear etched into her features. "Do you really believe anything you could say, any explanation you could offer, could ease my pain? Your betrayal, your humiliation of me, doesn't it mean anything to you? Is there anything that could make this situation less agonizing?" "But I haven't even had the chance to explain," she protested, desperation spilling over. "Why do I care about your reasons?" I erupted. "Will knowing why you did this bring me solace? Oh, everything's fine now that I understand your motivations?" Her eyes looked worn, terrified, and filled with regret. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "But what about Linda?" I felt a sharp sting in my chest at the mention of Linda. "I visited her and Ronnie over the weekend. They know about your infidelity and my decision to divorce you." Helen gasped, collapsing onto the floor in tears. I watched her for a moment, my beloved wife, the mother of my children, my partner for 25 years, now a shadow of her former self. With a heavy heart, I left her there, sprawled on the floor as I loaded her luggage into the trunk of the car. When I returned inside, she sat vacantly, staring into space, her spirit seemingly broken. I helped her to her feet and guided her outside to the car, the keys resting on the roof. I positioned her by the driver's side door, searching for appropriate words for our farewell. "Goodbye," Helen felt too weak, and "you cheating" felt like a cliché. So, I simply walked away. As I re-entered the house, I locked the door behind me, standing there in the hallway, frozen. I didn't think, I just waited, listening for the sound of Helen's car driving away. It was over.